Okay, I guess we'll call the special committee of the whole budget meeting to order. May I have approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Any discussion on the agenda? All those in favor? Motion carried. And the next item on the agenda is the adoption of the minutes. There's two sets of minutes, February 29th and March 2nd. Can I have somebody move the approval of the minutes?
So moved.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carried. Next item on the agenda is a recommendation for the proposed 2016 police budget. With respect to the proposed 2016 policing budget and the recent loss of auxiliary staff, the police have, RCMP have requested financial support for 2016 crime prevention. And it was moved by the Committee of the Whole, and I so moved to recommend to Council that consideration be given to the funding request for $7,500 for crime prevention program, and that the West Shore RCMP detachment proposed 2016 policing budget be forwarded as presented for consideration. All those in favor, or discussion? Jason?
Yes, I was unable to attend the meeting where this was discussed. I'd like to ask somebody that was there. Part of the report is to the question of the 4% overall increase. This is just a rough estimate. It's very hard to predict what's going to happen, and the fact is this increase may be even higher than estimated. What are we voting on?
Andrea, did you want to respond? Or?
Basically, in your budget binder, there is the RCMP contract in there, and it's laid out at about $3 million. Basically, what you're voting on is the policing budget. They have submitted it to us. It was also copied at that particular meeting, and the budget is capped at that amount that's in our budget. And what that means is you'd be voting on approving the amount of the budget cap. We don't really have a lot of flexibility in terms of what that is, just for your clarification. So
the motion is actually for the additional request of the $7,500 for the words elude me, the crime prevention line item in their budget, which was not approved in our budgets in the last couple of years and has not actually been invoiced to the city in the last 2 years. Therefore, it was not included in our budget anymore, and then they've re-looked at their budgets, and this is for the programming that operates with youth, to do some youth outreach and some redirection with youth. So this is for the $7,500, not for the main portion of the budget. Unless I misheard the motion?
The second half of the recommendation is that the RCMP West Shore Detachment proposed 2016 policing budget be forwarded as presented. And that's where my question is. It says it's 4%, but then the RCMP says it may be even higher than 4%. So what are we voting on? What's the number?
okay, so if you just give me a minute, I'll look that up. That is the actual main contract. I was not sure what you were clarifying, so we will give that to you here.
Sorry, while Andrea is looking for that number, I could just add that when I read through the budget, because they've been operating without a contract for, I believe it's 2 years, the 4% that's referenced in there is for the potential settlement. So that's their provisional budget, is based on what their best guess of what the RCMP contract will settle out at, because it isn't settled at this time.
That still doesn't clarify it. The number in my binder is total forecast of $2,888,222 for a percent increase of 4%. Now the report says it's hard to predict. This increase may be even higher than estimated. So are we voting on that exact number, or are we voting on whatever they ask for?
No, just to ensure everyone else is up to speed, the 4% that Councillor Nault is referring to is the summary of everything in your RCMP tab, and that includes municipal expense as well. So the federal contract is on page 1 of your RCMP tab, and because our fiscal year doesn't coincide with the RCMP's fiscal year, it never jives exactly. But what the amount is 25% of the 2015-2016 budget, and you'll see if you're looking on that page in your binder, is $652,500. The 2016-17 federal budget has been capped at $2.7 million and change, so we also set up 75% of that because the years don't coincide. So that gives us a total federal budget amount, as stated in your binder, page 1, of $2,686,802. So when we had our Protective Services Committee meeting, we were specifically discussing the amount of the federal contract and some of the amounts that were in there. But they do give us a hard budget cap, which we have for 2016-17, which is what has allowed me to set the federal budget as you see in your binder.
Any further questions or concerns? Lil Hall?
Thank you. Just in the recommendation, I know it says 7,500, but in both the RCMP budget that was given at Protective Services and the one in our binder says 7,000.
Yes, and we did discuss that at committee, because in your binder under RCMP on page 3 at the bottom, we have $1,500 in there for a community liaison officer. We haven't been spending that, so we already had $1,500 in the budget. So rather than putting in 9, we were able to put in the difference of 7,500, not 9.
Thank you. I forgot about that.
Rob?
I was very disappointed with the presentation that the RCMP did. I mean, I think it can come right down to where there was one statement where the officer said, "Listen, I'm a cop. I'm not an accountant." So we need to. I would like to suggest that we request moving forward that we have somebody from E-Division, or at least somebody who actually understands budgeting, to come and do a presentation next year, because this year's budget presentation was terrible. It brought up several concerns talking about budgeting, and the answer was, well, it's about protective services and it's about protecting the public. And so I'm not interested in really talking to you about if, for example, Rock the Shores is going to cost more this year, than it's about public safety. It's not about dollars, which was disappointing because we were supposed to be talking about budget when we were doing the presentation. So it was a very disheartening presentation. It was also, I felt very powerless. I felt like this is just what the budget is, and they're just doing it and giving us lip service versus actually interested to hear what we think is needed from a budget standpoint. So although I will be supporting the budget, or this part of the budget, I support it very reluctantly.
Cynthia?
I just wanted to add that our strength that we're requesting is the same as the previous year of 16.6 officers, and I just wanted to point that out for everyone.
Any further comments? There being none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. The next item on the agenda is a recommendation from the Transportation Capital Projects. Did you want to speak to that, Michael?
I can do. So the priorities that the committee is recommending line up with the priorities that have been placed in the budget. All of the projects listed 1 to 6 are either in the 2016 year of this 5-year budget or in the 2017 year, and have been fully funded in their respective years. Thank you.
There's a recommendation coming forward that recommended to council, and I so move that the following 6 staff recommended projects be forwarded to council for consideration in the 2016 budget. Number 1, multi-use trail connection, Painter Road to Ryder Heskill Way, Painter Road, Cotlow to Machosen, trail connection from Wishart Road to Royal Bay Drive, Machosen Road, Hatley Road to Lagoon Road, East Side Sidewalk and Bike Lanes, Latoria Road, Bike Lanes and Sidewalk, Galloping Goose Trail, GGT Overpass. Gord?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to the Director. The only one that I'm somewhat nervous about is the multi-use trail connection, Painter to Ryder Heshtal. I believe in it, absolutely, but I'm wondering if that would normally be something that we would require of the developer as the project gets built out, and whether that 300,000+ would be better spent on another infrastructure project, that wouldn't otherwise have been funded by a developer. That's the struggle I'm having, taking a project away from a developer to fund.
Well, and the developer would eventually build this out, inevitably as they develop. But we don't know how many years away that is. And this is a need for student safety now. That's the issue.
Cynthia?
Thanks. I support this coming forward now because most of the kids who are needing to use that trail right now are not obviously residents of Royal Bay. And I agree. It would be better if we were able to get developer contributions to put that in place. But just because of the timing and the importance of getting kids off the roadways and having a safe route to school, I think that's very important to do. So I'm supporting the project as is.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just another question. Is there enough flexibility in the schedule here, and I'm thinking back to the TPI agenda, that allows us to partner with projects, developers, to perhaps expedite the construction of a sidewalk? And I'm thinking Painter Machosen as an example, as they're building their sidewalk. That would be a prime opportunity for us to link in and do our work at the same time, realizing economies of scale and having complete blocks. So they might be ready to do it at the end of December or November as an example. Can we do that?
We're talking about the the walkway within the Royal Bay Pit.
No, I'm thinking of various projects like the sidewalks on Painter.
Oh, okay, as part of the development at the top end there.
Yeah.
By Machosen. Yeah, those are included in the plan. We're not planning to build a sidewalk in front of that development.
No, I understand that, but I just want to make sure that we're nimble enough, our schedule is nimble enough to be able to say when they go and construct their sidewalk, you know what, we're going to finish the block at the same time. So your crews are out there, it makes sense that you complete instead of just completing your frontage improvements and the city coming along 5 months later and finishing that block.
Well, currently that budget is in the 2017 column, which may well be when they build the sidewalk, but we don't know that for certain. It would seem to work out. The timing would be good because they normally build the buildings before they build the sidewalk. And they would probably be, at the earliest, they'd be building it late this year.
Yeah.
And then we would just come and connect to it the following year.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we have the opportunity to respond to situations, opportunities as they arise. So, thanks.
Any further questions or comments? Rob?
Thank you. Could we quickly, and I apologize for doing this, but 1 through 6, could we go through funding sources on those? Because I'm just wondering if staff are looking to cut the budget down, do we need to actually be looking at any of these, or are these all gas tax focused?
Yes, the majority are gas tax, and we have been able to find funding in the budget as it's presented this evening.
Okay, so we're good that way. Okay.
Any further questions or comments? Did I have a seconder for that motion? I don't believe we had one. Oh, we don't. Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. The next item on the agenda is the business case for a full-time administrative assistant for engineering. Michael, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I can do. So this goes back to, as early as 2014 when the department requested hiring of a full-time administrative assistant to assist the engineering support coordinator. And then we had a retirement in Public Works that was replaced, and there was a discussion at budget time that perhaps we should just put half-time in that budget and wait and see how the Public Works position worked out, and that's worked out really, really well. But we found that there was a lot of improvement that could be made in the work done over there at Public Works, both in taking administrative work away from the field employees and particularly the senior managers, and also serving the public better. So while we had a hope that maybe some of that time might be available over in the office here to help out, it's proved to be a lot more valuable having a full-time person there than we had anticipated. So then, and the half-time position wasn't filled that year while we worked out all that. And so we renewed the request in 2015, but it was cut down to half-time because there were difficulties with balancing the budget, and that seemed to be a reasonable way to achieve that. We're because we got a half-time in 2015, but we ended up filling it late. Essentially, the person's been working full-time with with those funds, and we found that it's finally meant we can realize some of the systems that Nora's been working on, trying to implement, but simply hasn't had the time to make them work. They've been designed, and these systems are meant to ensure that we get timely response to the public and nothing falls through the cracks. So they're basically a reminder system and safety net that catches everything that the technical people might drop in their concentration on the bigger projects. And we think this is being really successful, and we're trying to expand it. But we need the full-time position to achieve it as outlined in this full report. But part of the effort here by this person would be to assist with other departments, work overloads, peak workloads, or absences, because that has been a bit of a struggle at time in the rest of the office. Hence the request for full-time status for this person.
Thank you. So based on the addition of the half-time administrative position in the engineering department and it being proven valuable and productive, the increase to full-time will return greater value both in the engineering department and throughout the organization. It was recommended, and I so move, that the current engineering department half-time administrative position be increased to full-time with the understanding that this position will provide absence and peak load relief for the other departments to ensure that all departmental workloads achieve optimum balance during these absences or peak load periods. Any comments or questions? All those in favor? Oh, you do? Sorry, go ahead.
Looking at, sorry, I'm jumping forward, but looking at page 31, which is the explanation of current review of our 2016 to 2020 financial plan, it has a reduction of the engineering administrative staff of $35,000. So my question to you is, does that affect the budget by actually voting in favor of this?
Yeah, so when I had brought forward the draft one of the budget, I didn't realize that this was only a half-time position. So I had actually included in their budget for a full-time position. I have since deleted it, but when we get to the budget summary, you'll note there is a small amount there, which is basically equal to the amount that I've taken out. You'll see there's a small surplus on the bottom line of around $40,000.
So it does or does not affect the budget?
If you were to approve it to go to full-time, yep, we have the money there.
Okay. Thank you. I have a second question. Page 28, second paragraph. Basically, the need for this has grown recently with the temporary departure of one member of the finance team. My question is, how long do we anticipate that departure to be? And when are we planning on actually replacing that or having that person come back? And how does that, like, is that a valid, I guess my question is, if it's very temporary, is that really sort of a valid statement then?
Yes, it is temporary, but I think it was maybe given as an example of the type of need to have some overlap when we do have people either on holidays or sick. That's the admin assistance for the other departments. And basically we're working toward a spirit of cooperation here to not have the individual departments quite so individual, so that we can cooperate with the admin assistants to pitch in where there is a need. So in terms of the finance department, we've just received formal notification of a full-time leave, and we are looking to fill that as soon as we're able to.
Ian, did you have something you wanted
Madam Chair, if I could just comment. One of the things that I've recognized since I got here is that we are constantly short-staffed in the admin assistant area of the organization through either sick leave, vacation time, other leave, union leave, variety of issues. We're always short-staffed. And two things that I think we need to do is, number one, work better together as a group when we're working on that. But we also need to make sure we've got the horsepower there to actually work as a group. And so when we talked about increasing the engineering staff member to full-time, I thought it was critically important for us to do that, to make sure that we have appropriate staffing at the admin level to make sure that we can provide adequate coverage and keep the machine running, so to speak.
Yeah, I have one. Oh, sorry. Can I just do one final follow-up? My final follow-up is, and I'll direct this through the chair to our director of administration. A couple of years ago, we ended up raising all the admin staff's level, and the idea was that they all got a pay increase, but they were taking on additional responsibilities. And if we continually hear that we're still shorthanded in that, I'm just wondering, how has that helped us by increasing their levels?
So through you, Madam Chair, Back in 2014, when that change was made in the administration department, that was when the position of Director of Administration was actually created. So in order for me to move into that position, I still took the corporate officer's duties along with me in the position, but that meant because of my other duties and overseeing bylaw division, communications, and occupational health and safety, I didn't have the same amount of time to manage the administrative work. So all of the staff that we had currently at that time were all reassigned duties who would do different things, everybody stepping up and taking on more responsibilities. And for that, there was a small increment or an increase in their pay to capture those additional responsibilities. So that was the intent behind the reorganization of the whole admin department, was to try to restructure the work and who does what without bringing in more people. So what this is really helping with is in the proposal that we have here and the discussions about administrative assistance is across the board. Building department, engineering, finance, administration, everybody. So that instead of everybody being in a department and this is who I work for and this is what I do, it becomes more of everybody becoming cross-trained, learning more about covering in each other's departments, and whether it's workload or absences, we'll have the ability to have people just help wherever they're needed. So everybody still has their own specific duties and responsibilities to their division, but when time allows, or if their stuff isn't time sensitive, then that might get put on hold and they'll step over and help another department with coverage or workload or whatever the case may be. So that's the intent behind increasing this half-time, to have more availability of people helping each other. So the administration restructure in 2014 was because we created a director. We never had a director in administration before. And then everybody's had to take over the work that I didn't have time for anymore. That was the restructure part.
Jason?
Yes, I can understand the need for changing this to a full-time position. I guess my only reluctance is the providing absence and peak load relief to other departments. My experience with the federal government is where you have a department in charge of a person, there very rarely is any spare time for that person to devote to other departments. And that comes down to a case of training your staff to share resources. I don't think the city has done a particularly stellar job of that in the last few years. Will this person be reporting to Director of Engineering or the Chief Administrative Officer?
Nora, did you want to address the committee?
Madam Chair, if I could just interrupt, it would be to the Director of Engineering. It would be an engineering position.
If I can just embroider on that a bit, their immediate report is to the engineering administration supervisor, and she will make it her business to make sure that we provide that service as we have been to the extent we can so far. And Nora may have more to add to that.
I'm a little bit nervous. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. I'm a little bit nervous talking in front of you. I've never done this in 29 years. We need to get back to where we were in the beginning. And like Pat said, working together. The incumbent that we had hired in October 2015, she has background in administration. She has payroll, finance courses behind her. She's got the experience. We've got to break down these walls and work together as a team. We also have to realize we got Royal Bay. We need to be there for our developers. The more that we can get the development happening, those permits out, the better that we'll be seen. So that it's customer service. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Nora. Anybody else with a comment or a question? Rob?
I'm struggling with this, and I'll tell you the reason why. The reason I'm struggling with this is that I'm concerned about employee creep, and that we continually approve one or two new positions every year, and it continually builds to a point where it was pre my time, but where there was a large layoff of staff because we were financially not able to afford this. So I struggle when we bring on new staff, not this specific position, but as we continually grow, I don't want us to get to the point where we're suddenly taken aback and go, oh my God, we have to do a dramatic cut, and we end up cutting 4, 5, 6 staff members because our budget doesn't allow it. So that's where I struggle with this. I'm not struggling with this specific position. I'm worried about employee creep.
Cynthia?
Thanks. And I'd like to point out that I think the employee creep is a really important thing. We have to really feel that the position is justified and that we can get good value for our residents for the money. But in all honesty, the year that we had those major layoffs was actually a year where there was situations outside of our control. It was to do with BC Assessment and changes that they made. So, we didn't have any opportunity to plan for the changes that happened that year. And I believe that that won't, at least I'm hope, that won't happen that way again. And I think that I've observed in my time here a consistent, need in the engineering department to try to make sure that all the boxes get ticked, because when they don't, we're not happy with the results, and our residents aren't happy with the results, and our developers aren't pleased to work with a system that is unresponsive. So I think for the benefit of all, this is a justified, necessary resource, and I'm hoping that it will allow us to do a better job and allow us to make plans for the future that don't include that creep, because I've also seen happen that when you don't staff, eventually people get burnt out, worn out, tired of it, and they can leave. They can leave a lot of them all at once, and it can leave you scrambling. So I think it's better to do a little bit rather than wait till it falls apart completely and you have to do a lot.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? All those in favor with the recommendation? Opposed? Motion carried. The next item on the agenda is a financial plan overview with our Acting Director of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you have been given some hard copies of these large sheets of paper. I thought it might make it a little bit easier for you to read, and we also have the budget summary up on the screen for you this evening. So if anyone needs a copy, I think, Megan, do you have some spare copies available? Does anyone? You just may find it's a little bit easier to read, although you guys are really good with your iPads. Yeah, it's hard to see. Pardon me? Oh, if you just click on it, it should take the highlighting away there. Yeah. Okay, so does everybody have what they need here? We're literally on the same page? Okay, good. So we've already had a look at this budget document, and I've brought it back to you tonight to basically reflect on a few of the changes that have been made at council direction, and also to discuss a little bit the municipal property taxation revenue, because when this was initially put forward, I had just taken basically 3.95% of a revenue increase, which had been approved last year for this year's revenue, and we've now sat down and done some very complicated math on that. And there is going to be a small change there due to some discussion that Ian and I had this afternoon. But I think for now, I'd just like to point out, and this does relate to the discussion we've just had about adding staffing, is that we are seeing the effect of new development coming in terms of our property taxation revenues. So basically, council approved 3.5%. That is included in there. And the other 3% approximately is coming from new construction. So this is what is keeping our departments busy. And by the time it hits the revenue side of your budget, usually there's already been a lot of work invested, because when I talk to our planning department, they often are meeting with developers, but a lot of those developments don't go ahead. But we still have to invest those staff resources to answer all those questions and inquiries about rezoning applications. We all know the situation with Ani, something that required a huge amount of staff resources, but we actually have lost $10 million here. And this is something that we'll talk about here after we've run through this. But at this point in time, when we looked at the loss of that, it would appear, actually, we did do the math, there's about $60,000 less in the forecast. So instead of 12.8, it's going to be 12.75. That's not a lot of money, but I wanted to point that out because it drives our workloads, not just in planning, where we have put in provision for a temporary full-time planner that has been approved. We have put in provision for a student in our parks department. Again, that's a reflection of the growth, and you're seeing it in your engineering department as well. I think those factors are all linked together. And the really nice thing this year is we're actually starting to see it reflected in revenue. So when we went through the building department revenue, we saw a very significant increase in our permit revenues. This isn't new. I haven't changed anything here, but I just wanted to remind us because it's a little while in between our budget meetings. And so as Royal Bay goes ahead, we know we will have new construction there for next year as well, unless something really goes badly amiss, but it looks like it's all in the hopper now. So I'm just looking at the explanatory notes I've given you, and we haven't gone out on a limb at this point and forecast a lot of new construction for 17, 18, 19, and 20. So I've just kept some very modest growth there for our taxation. Some of that could either be tax increase, it could be new construction. But what we find when Ian and I were looking at this is, generally speaking, our budget for the current year is very accurate because that's right in front of us. We know what's coming at us. Our budget for the next year is reasonably accurate. But when we get out, 3 more years, it's much more of an estimate. And so we're not going to say that we know we've got every single expense in here either. So we're being cautious. We don't want to overstate our revenue if we don't have the corresponding expenditures in there. Okay? So that's important to note. The PILT revenue, basically I have taken what we received last year minus the one-off settlement that we achieved, and I did increase that by the 3.5%. That's fairly predictable, so that's how we got to that figure. Nothing has changed there. Our conditional government grants, that's our note 2. Now we have made a couple of changes here, and this is why I want to point this out for council. And I may look to our engineer and our CAO on note 2. This is to put $2.5 million in here to cover the estimated cost of relocating the Lagoon pump station. In 2016, in the current year budget, we do have some monies in there, and I've been told to leave them in there for $310,000, and that's to basically waterproof the existing pump station. But we're looking at the need to relocate it. So if I can turn that technical side over to you, Michael, because I'm getting way in over my head on that one.
It's really a marker to keep your options open so that you've got a budget that allows you to do what you finally decide to do. I'll be bringing forward a report at the next council meeting to sort of bring us along in that process of making that decision. But at some point this year, we're going to have to decide whether to do the protection to the pump station recommended by the engineer, or do a temporary pump protection and consider the idea of replacing the pump station. And I'll be laying out in the report some of the reasons why that is looking like a better option than it did to begin with, despite the expense. But I think it's better that we go through that report, and then maybe we have to go through a public process as well. Decision yet to be made. It is possible to put off the final decision until next year. Certainly if the decision is to build a new pump station, there's no possibility of getting that done this year, so we would be doing temporary protection and then building it in another year. But anyway, this change to the budget is just a marker to keep your options open, so we're not making a decision through budget that hasn't been fully examined yet.
Does anybody have any questions? Rob?
Looking at developer contributions, it's significantly higher for 2016, which is great. I'm not complaining, but are we fairly comfortable with that number? Like, is that a realistic number compared to, it seems like it's almost, well, it's over double what we normally expect to get income-wise.
If you don't mind, do you think we could just sort of work, well, I don't know if we are. I was going to sort of work my way down line by line. I just wanted to flag this because it's a $2.5 million ask that wasn't in there the last time. So I thought we should just make sure if you had any further questions. Cynthia?
Well, just on that one, reading through note 2 on your notes, which speaks to that $2.5 million cost to relocate the Lagoon pump station, it also shows that 2019 has had the transportation upgrade for Souk Road from Goldstream to Aldine moved forward to 2020 due to no further tax funds being available. So I'm just having a hard time, not so much with relocating the sewer lift station, because I think we sort of have talked about whether or not that would not be a smart thing to do. Although it makes me really wonder about building a sewage treatment plant at Clover Point. Something that occurred to me as I was thinking about my CRD issues. You know, and we think now, well, why did we build the sewage lift station there? When the reason at the time was because that was where we could find to put it, which is kind of the reason why Clover Point is on the table now down at the CRD. But I'm having a difficulty with why sewer users aren't paying for this instead of the gas tax funding. So we're basically, you know, sacrificing transportation upgrades that everyone in the city would have the benefit of, whether they were walking, cycling, driving, or whether they were a sewer user or had a septic tank, for something where we're strictly improving the world for primarily newer development.
Ian?
Madam Chair, this was a very quick last-minute decision to throw this in the budget, and I made the call to use 25% of the gas tax money simply because we didn't have any other options in front of us at the moment. This obviously would require significantly more debate with council about whether we go to long-term borrowing to fund it, or whether gas tax funding is appropriate or not. For now, we needed to get it in, I think, as a place marker and have a funding source. And I think I can say that staff believe this is a significantly important piece of infrastructure that we need to protect. So if push comes to shove and we need to fund it, that's the kind of the position I was taking. Then the gas tax is an eligible source. It's just whether it's an appropriate source for council, and that's a council decision at a future date.
Jason?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to include the contingency as discussed at TPI. Investing over $300,000 in reinforcing a pump station we know is going to be destroyed by the ocean or made unusable by the ocean seems to be throwing good money after bad. To comment on Councillor Day's, maybe we should charge this to the sewer users. Colwood has always had a very schizophrenic approach to the sewer users. A lot of us, for example, those of us on private residences in Belmont Park, the city basically held a gun to our head and said, you're getting sewers and you're paying for them, and if you're not hooked up by X date, we'll come in and do it for you. So not all sewer users really wanted to be on sewers. Number two, the Lagoon Pump Station services one specific area, and to make them pay the full $2.5 million would be, I think, prohibitively expensive for those particular residents. And number three, sewers have always been pushed down our throats as something that drives the engine of development. And if development is good for Colwood, then the cost should be shared by Colwood as well as the benefits. So I think it's time the city got on with really making the sewers an asset that the whole community is responsible for. If you buy the line that development is good for us, then sewers are good for us, and therefore we should all share in paying for them. For example, I share in paying for school taxes, and I don't have any kids in school. I'd love to get out of that.
Any other questions or concerns? Would you like to continue, Andrea?
Okay, thank you very much. And we will, once we walk through the budget summary, have a look at our reserves, because it's kind of hard to walk a straight line just keeping on one topic, but we'll try, but we may have to take some side trips so that you can see where the money's coming from for these. So that was basically a big change. And just to Councillor Day's point about the $2 million upgrade that was moved, we would have had to move that anyways, regardless of whether the pump station got put in there, because we just did not have enough gas tax money. However, we have some good news there. We do have other reserves that are growing quite nicely. Sorry, not too close to the mic here. Okay, note 3. Now, let me see. Do you want me to just back up here and we'll go through this line by line, just back to Councillor Martin? See, I'm only highlighting where there's been changes, actually, so I wasn't going to go back. But Councillor Martin, you had a specific question, I believe, on developer contributions, which is under sort of municipal ticket revenue, that section. And I believe we have covered that previously, but it's a lot of information. That was specific contributions coming in from Royal Bay, and we've actually already collected about half of that money, and I'm being very conservative. I worked very closely with our planner, and in the past we haven't budgeted these developer contributions, but they are real. They come in the form of either amenity or affordable housing contributions. And we are required by the bylaws to take that money and put them into the applicable reserve funds. So when we get to the reserve funds, you'll see the money coming in to those reserves.
Sorry, what line are you on?
Councillor Martin had asked, thanks. So in 2016, under developer contributions, there was 370. I believe that was the question, right? Stop me if I'm answering. Yeah, okay. So I can pause if you have other questions, but like I said, we've tried to cover most of this previously, but it is a lot. So now, note 3, I'm trying to make sure we cover things that have changed from our earlier budget meetings so that we can kind of make sure that everybody's clear on what's going on here. So we did, at the CAO's recommendation, remove the $20,000 that had been budgeted for secondary suite prosecutions. I won't read all these out. You can see them here, but those are some of the changes we've made. There was a couple of other minor ones. When I was doing some checking, I noticed a couple things hadn't pulled through correctly, but nothing major. We had, in previous years, done an estimate of our parcel tax for the new Colwood Central, and when my regular deputy Jen was in, she noted that there had been an error made in previous years, and it basically nets itself out. We had overestimated the cost of repaying Colwood Central, the interest and the principal, and then that is offset by the matching parcel tax. So if that's over by a couple $100,000, the parcel tax is also over. So we reduce everything accordingly. It does not affect the bottom line. But if anybody was checking, you might wonder why those figures changed. Basically, the parcel tax has to equal the amount of the principal and interest.
May I just follow up on that? So you're talking about the sewer LAS parcel taxation?
Yeah. If you were to look at the sewer workbook that I've provided with you to you tonight with the old one, there's a change on the amount of the parcel tax, but there's also a change in the amount of the principal and interest. So it all equals, like there's no net effect on the bottom line.
Okay, because that was my question I have highlighted here, if I may, just because I noticed the parcel tax goes from, $477 to $580, and then in years, and I realize our crystal ball is pretty foggy by 2019 and 2020, but it goes down significantly to $295.
Yeah.
But the interest stayed the same. Interest on debt stays pretty much the same.
Yes, there was actually, there was two things going on there. One was we caught the fact that we had doubled up on the amount of the interest and principal for the new parcel tax. But we also, the good news, we have paid off Colwood, is it east, west? There's 2 or 3 of them that are paid off in the 2018 fiscal year, and you'll see those costs drop, which is really nice. I'm happy to see us lose some of that debt. Okay.
And just correlating with that, at the bottom of the operating expenses is sewer, and it's 586, and it goes to 596, 607, 629, and 640. And I just wondered, maybe I'm misunderstanding what's in the sewer, but I thought it would have to do with the LAS parcel taxation and the interest on debt?
Basically the sewer, if we were to go and look in the sewer workbook, the correlation there is up here. You also have third line from the top. See that sewer, the parcel taxation? Those figures are also going up, and then your point is they go down. The parcel tax goes down because we lost, I think, 3 parcels. Okay, they're paid off. And in sewer, we did go through the sewer workbook, but it's complicated. In the sewer workbook, we levy user fees to cover the cost of operating the sewer, to cover the amount of the debt payments, and we also have to roll up in there the fact that we collect money on behalf of the CRD, such as the septic parcel tax, and there's one other thing in there, but that is all in the sewer workbook. Okay. Good question. So I'm just going to have a look at note 3 to see if there was I think I don't want this to be any surprises. You see, when I did this up, I made some assumptions, which was you may or may not have approved the 7,500 tonight, but I did put it in there just to make sure that we've got everything in there. And we can, it's always easy to take it out. We've added budget for a parks student. We noted that there had not been a retirement allowance put in for a fire department member, which is now in there. You can see I have reduced the position until we knew what council's decision was tonight for full-time versus part-time engineering assistant. And we've talked about the interest expense calculation. So if you're okay with note 3, I'll pause, I'll keep going.
Andrea, I'm trying to understand your explanation around sewer LAS partial taxation and the sewer cost.
Yep.
I think I kind of get it, but where I get confused is if I look at 2019, and I understand that 2019 we've paid off several debts, and that's why the sewer LAS taxation number has gone down.
Yeah.
But our sewer cost actually continues to rise.
Yeah.
So, so in fact, it's costing the city, it looks like, in 2018 about $20,000, but in 2019 it's costing us over $300,000. So I'm just trying to understand.
I'm just trying to. Are you on this? I'm on the.
I'm sorry. I'm looking at
workbook.
the big spreadsheet
Okay.
that you gave out.
Okay, so we start at operating costs starting at 586,000. Is that where you're at?
No. Okay. So no. If you go to the top with the sewer LAS parcel.
Oh, that's the revenue. Yeah.
Yes, that's the revenue. So if you look at 2018,
Yeah.
we're about 580.
Yeah.
And then 2019, we're at 294.
Yep.
So there's a significant drop.
Yeah.
But then when you cross-reference down to the bottom where the sewer costs are, in 2018, we're 607, but there isn't a correlating decrease in sewer cost. It goes up to 629.
Yeah. Okay, so.
Right. But I'm trying to understand how we're offsetting that.
Yeah,
Because the the sewer tax is supposed to offset.
So we have other revenues. Thank you, Ian. Kind of hard to for me to even keep track of all this. If you look in the next, so there's the revenue section, and then there's total financial services, and then see where it says total revenue on the budget summary. Okay, just above that, you'll see sewer revenues, sewer user fees, connection. So you have to add that in as well. And the best way to pull all this together is to look at the reprinted sewer workbook. Yeah, thanks, Ian. But that's the rest of your revenue. But we did make it all balance on the detailed calculations in the sewer workbook, which is critical. Yeah. That is, I believe, principal plus interest, like whatever that cost is. Yeah, we have to recover the total cost. And the only other thing that's changed, again, if you change one thing, you have to change 5 more, is when we put in $2.5 million for the relocation of the sewer pump station, that also is showing up in your sewer workbook as an additional capital item. Okay? Those are very good questions because this is one of our biggest budget pressures, and I really don't want to rush you through this part of it. Cynthia?
I know you already gave the answer, but my brain has refused to accept it somehow. I just, in your note 3, it says reducing the admin assistant position. But we had a motion here earlier that we're going to have her at full time.
Yes, but I didn't, this one I didn't want to presuppose. I did not know what council wanted to do with this, and that's why I've removed that cost until you had the discussion this evening.
So it's out, but it will be in.
It can be, yes. Okay. All right, so if you're fine with that, I wanted to point out what has not changed, because that's important too, is so you had that big sheet with all those special projects on it, and we have managed to find the money for all of them, and so there are no changes on that great big sheet, okay? Note number 5, if you're up for this one, we should have a look at your reserve balances, and that also includes your deferred. So you've got another big sheet there. So on this sheet, what we've done is, if you want to bring up that tab, sure. The first half of the sheet is your statutory reserves, and you actually have bylaws establishing these. And going forward, in discussion with Ian, we've been working so hard to try and make sure that the figures coming forward in budget and in your statements are accurate, and then the next step will be to come up with some policies, and I look forward to that. That will be kind of easy compared to making sure this data is good. But you, going forward, will be looking at your statutory reserves and being thoughtful about how are they going to be used and when is enough in them, and how do we either want to build them or draw them down. The bylaws do speak to what we can use the money for, so that talks about what we can draw out of them. So I want to draw your attention, first of all, to the green column on the left under statutory reserves, and this is a snapshot. So basically, there's going to be some minor changes here because we're still working our way through year end, but it's going to be very close to $6.5 million in your statutory reserves, and you got the whole listing of them there. And I debated about giving you all this detail. I didn't mean to bog you down. What I would like you to focus on is the fact that how does it look 5 years out, peering into our crystal ball? And that's always getting fuzzy the further out we go. And when we plug in the various additions and subtractions to these reserves in 5 years' time, we're actually looking at a net increase of $3.6 million and change in those reserves. And the blue is important. When I rolled all this up, we actually had some small surpluses for 2018, 19, and 20. And I've made that very clear to council so that you can see what we've done. So in consultation with our CAO, we realized that as we do our budgeting, we're not as accurate going out into the future as we'd like to be. We're pretty sure there's probably quite a few expenses that aren't in there, but we don't want to create expectations with council that we have all this extra money. What we have done for now is we've clearly highlighted those differences. So in 2018, we had $360,000 that we have added up into capital projects, because one of the areas we know that we're deficient in is we don't have any kind of an asset management plan. And that's critical because we know that the cost of maintaining our infrastructure, it's going to be expensive. And I think the discussion we've had this evening about the need to move the sewer, the pump station, that's a good example of a sudden need for a whole bunch of money. And this is not even talking about if we have to find money to put toward a sewer treatment plant. That's a whole other huge possible requirement. So I just want council to be thoughtful on that, and that's why I've given you this very clear note that yes, we at this point have some monies which we have put into the capital reserve. And I don't know, Ian, do you want to speak to that anymore? Okay. Okay, so I'll keep going as much as I can, just to yeah. No, I actually did that for my own benefit. No, we're not in the red. That's our sewer capital reserve, and I'm keeping a close eye on that because that's the one fund that there's going to be pressure on that fund, and that was just more for my benefit. Yeah. So there's a few interesting things that are happening here I just wanted to draw your attention to if you haven't already noticed them. Is the affordable housing, which is what, the fourth one down, that reserve, and the amenity reserve fund. So we have money coming in, and at the end of the 5 years, we're looking at the affordable housing fund going up almost $300,000, and we're looking at the amenity reserve fund also increasing. Now, this year was the first year, I think, where I've pointed out to council that this fund was available to fund a number of things. And so we made sure that we did. You can see where there's money coming out. That was to fund some of our capital projects, and that is within the guidelines established by the Community Amenity Fund. Because one thing, you know, as council, you want to look at that and make sure that we have a plan for this money as it's coming in, that we also have a plan for what it's being used for. I'm just trying to see, one of the areas that always has pressure on it is our fleet replacement, and as we go further into the details of our capital asset plan, we will be able to refine the amounts. Right now we know approximately which pieces of equipment may need to be replaced, but we have not had sufficient reserves up until now to be able to go out and buy all the equipment you need without incurring debt. And we're just finally starting to reach a tipping point. We talked about this when we were going through the need to buy a new fire apparatus, not the T-Rex, but the new, help me here, Carrie, you know, the new truck we had in the budget for $850,000. That's just a regular engine, right? Yeah. So we had initially thought we would have to go out and borrow for that, but when I worked through all this math, I went, you know, if we can manage to keep putting this amount of money into the reserves, and that's one of the reasons I wanted you to see this, I don't want to bury you in paper, but also you can see the significance of, as we can build these reserves, then we don't have to keep taking on new debt, because we are at about 50% of our actual allowed capacity right now, and as we know, we have to pay it back. So that's a nice illustration of why it's good to start building these reserves, and we are making progress. I'm just going to pause there on that section because there's a lot of information.
Is there any questions from the committee? Jason?
Just a question. Infrastructure deficit reserve, I see it just keeps going up and up and up.
Yeah.
When do we ever spend that, and
well,
what would it be on?
That's going to be at council direction when we have a policy on that. This was a council policy that we take 1% of our annual tax increase and that we put into this reserve. So that money can be spent on infrastructure. There's a number of parameters. I haven't drawn on it yet, but again, Ian, if you want to help me, that's money I'm sure we're going to be needing.
Madam Chair, there's primary pool of funds that you use for asset management is your capital works reserve, and if you create a reserve such as this called infrastructure deficit, really what that's doing is if we had an asset management program in place, it would identify our current deficit in funding for just renewal and replacement of existing assets. That's what this reserve is essentially doing, and Council, I guess several years ago, said we're going to put 1% of budget aside to start funding those, funding the deficit, which we don't know what it is yet, but we do know we have one because everybody does. So that's what this is doing, and it is going to continue to build, and then once we get the program in place and we know how much we have to fund and when, we can either roll this into the general capital, or if you want to continue to identify it as a separate item, we can keep it as a separate item, and if we have to increase it or decrease it, council can make that decision at that time.
So just a follow-up question on that. If we identify under capital assets that our road infrastructure is in need of a lot more improvement than it's got, that would come out of this fund? Or
yes. So if we, for instance, if we get a pavement management program in place that says we have to resurface a road every 10 years to prevent us from rebuilding, we could either use this fund, general taxation, or the general capital reserve. Any of those three would apply.
Gord?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, just on that infrastructure deficit reserve. So did I hear there's going to be a policy coming forward in terms of use probably before the next budget cycle?
I don't think we'll have a full asset management program in place before the next budget.
No, I guess I'm not really seeking a full asset management plan, but in terms of how we're going to populate the fund, and a great example of this fund is in Saanich. Saanich has a committed practice of increasing taxes by 0.5 or 0.75%, dedicated to infrastructure deficit reduction, and has done that for 10 years, and I believe it's a 12 or 15-year plan, if memory serves me right, and that's what's funding all their improvements that they're doing now, which will get rid of their deficit. So I guess I'm looking for a policy that says we will increase taxes by 0.5% every year to, as a matter of policy, to build up this fund so we can.
So through the chair, I want to say three things about this. Number one, council's already established that policy.
Is there a written policy? Because I'm not sure that there was. That's, I guess, what's a little confusing to me, because I know I was the one that made the motion to include funding.
So I'll tell you how staff view council motion as a policy until a new motion replaces it. So from our perspective, our direction is to put in 1% a year. We'll continue to do that until council directs us otherwise. And hopefully, time permitting, Andrea and I will work on a reserve policy generally for all of the reserves, and because there is best practices, the GFOA have put out best practices for reserve balances and reserve contributions that municipalities should make. And if we can get to that this year, we're going to try and get that before council so that we can have a good indication of where our reserve balances should be. That's number two. And then the third is the infrastructure deficit. The only way you can identify what your true deficit is to get through an asset management plan, a full program. So right now, we're just identifying and acknowledging that we have a deficit, but we don't know to what degree. Saanich is probably at a stage where they know exactly what their deficit is out 15 and 20 and 25 years. We don't know that yet. And that's what we'll have to work on over the next couple of years in getting our asset management program up and running.
Any other questions? Carol?
One quick one. Identification of the equipment replacement at $1,019, and it has no change across the board. Like, is that even something we need to have, or why is there nothing?
I would like to explain that one. That used to be, there used to only have one fund here for all your equipment replacement, and in 2014, council, from what I can see, gave direction to staff, and they took the total amount of money that was in there and split it into 3 reserves. So we basically should take that money and dump it in one of the reserves, to answer your question. But that's a very astute question, because what we did is we created the reserve fleet replacement operations. That's our public works equipment. We created fleet replacement fire hall and fleet replacement sewer out of that one big lump, because the thinking was the need to more accurately identify the equipment that needed to be replaced in those areas. So that's just a leftover that didn't get transferred. Yeah. Cynthia?
Well, just on that one, I'm just wondering, is there a bylaw that needs to be dealt with then for that old reserve?
I did look, and you do have a bylaw that spells that out. I pulled the bylaws as we were going through here. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so if I may, then we'll look at the second half of this sheet. And these are not statutory reserves, but these are monies that we collect ahead of the actual expenditures being incurred. So I thought you might find this interesting, because some of these monies sit there for quite a while and aren't necessarily active. So let's just again do a bit of a check on, at the end of 2015, the total amount of deferred revenue is in the neighborhood of $3.4 million, the column on the left. And if we go way over to the right, the ending balance is $915,000 if we do everything we say we're going to do. And that's a total drawdown of almost $2.5 million. So, sorry, I'm just looking at 2 different things. There's development cost charges and other. The net difference, the first portion of deferred revenue is what you call DCCs. So we'll try that again. DCCs have just over 2 million in them. And going all the way across at the end of 2020, they've actually gone up a little bit, 163,000. We have to keep track of them separately. And then down below the next section is deferred revenue. Your deferred revenue is going to go down 2.5 million almost. And the development cost charges are going to go up a little bit. So the net difference is that bottom right-hand figure. In total, deferred revenue goes down 2.3 million. But not to forget that up above there, our reserves have actually gone up by 3.6. I just want to point that out so big picture you can kind of have a bit of an idea of what's happening. So in total, you're still ahead in the cash department. So if your reserves are increasing 3.6, top half, your deferred revenue is going down 2.3. You still have a net difference to the positive of 1.3 million. So we have some flexibility there. Now where we don't have flexibility is what we can spend some of these monies on. Like it is carefully prescribed. And as Michael can tell us in terms of DCCs, when you have a bylaw that, for instance, regulates your road DCCs, I'm going to draw attention to that. Right now we're sitting on $1.4 million of road DCCs. And we are looking at a significant amount of money to be coming into those road DCCs with some of the various development projects. We can only draw money out based on what is allowed in that existing DCC bylaw, which I know is one of the reasons why our engineering department is saying we need to revise that. Do you want to just maybe speak to that briefly, Michael?
Yeah, we need to get that bylaw done within a couple, 3 months. So that will be our number one priority over that period. Emmett's currently away on holidays, back next week, and that will be his number one from that point on.
Jason?
Just so quickly to recap on that, so these DCCs reflect the existing bylaw, and if we make a change in that, the numbers will all be completely different?
Yes. Now, as the DCCs come in, we need to redo the bylaws so that we have more flexibility in what we spend them on. So some of the projects that right now, say we're not planning on doing that project until 4 or 5 years in the future, and there are some, they will benefit by having that new DCC bylaw, because then we will be allowed legally to use those monies to help pay for the cost of that project. That's why this is critical.
So to clarify now, when we collect, it says this dollar goes towards this sidewalk, and the new DCC will just say this goes into a DCC pot and we can use it for any one of the authorized projects?
With DCCs, you have to specify what the projects are that you're collecting the money for. Right now, we're specifying mostly projects that are already done. We've only got one project left on the books that isn't complete. So we need to update that with a list of projects that we're moving towards. And the amount we collect for each lot may remain the same, quite likely remain the same. But it's just the target for those dollars is different. But we do have to be specific.
I don't think that specifically answered my question. If a developer pays X dollars into DCCs for, say, the road in front of his property, does that specific dollar have to be spent on that specific project, or does that go into a pool of DCC charges that we spread on whichever project we're currently doing?
Well, there is a pool of DCC money, and the municipality can choose to spend it on any of the projects listed in the bylaw. But the projects listed in the bylaw, divided by the number of DCC units you expect to collect, have to come out at the right number. You can't just have an infinite list and collect money towards that list. You have to specify a number, come up with the estimates, divide by the number of units you expect to collect, and then that is the number you collect. And a developer rarely gives a DCC which in effect is going into a project in front of his property, because the DCCs are collected for that list of projects, and usually they won't be in front of his property. If they are, he does frontage improvements, gets credit against the DCC anyway.
Any further questions? Ian?
Madam Chair, just to clarify a bit more with the DCCs, if the DCC project lists are all projects that have to be upsized as a result of the demand from growth. That's the only projects that can be in a DCC bylaw. So if you have to take a road from 2 lanes to 4 lanes because growth has demanded that you expand the size of that road, that's an eligible DCC project. So when a developer is making a DCC contribution, which has been calculated based on the list of projects, they're paying now for the demand that their development has placed on our current infrastructure. So they're really they're paying now for what we have to do maybe 20 years in advance. Sometimes it's only 2 or 3 years, but sometimes it's 20, 30 years in advance. So it's rarely, as Michael said, it rarely applies to something right in front of their property. Occasionally you tell a developer, for instance, they have to upsize a sewer pump station that we might have on our DCC list to do in 10 years, but if they don't do it, they can't develop their site. So there's occasionally something where they have to pay instead of a DCC, but most of the time they still have to pay their DCCs because it's for future demands.
Any further questions? No?
Okay. So one line I did want to draw your attention to, so we've talked about the development cost charges. So you can see right now we do levy for road and we do levy for sewer. And there's a little bit there for cash in lieu. And that money isn't changing because that money was kind of a one-off. I think we collected. It can only be spent on purchasing new parklands. So there are some fairly strict rules around that. The one item we have talked a lot about as a funding source is under other. That's all our deferred revenue. So right now we have $2.5 million in gas tax at the present time. We receive $700,000 per year. And I actually think it's a pretty good thing that we're managing to use that because it is there for a purpose. But you'll see that one item in particular, it's not infinite, and that's why this one project that was well out in the future, we knew at this point in time we didn't have enough gas tax, but things can change. We will have other developments happening and other revenue sources. And it's fluid. I mean, we put our budget together and we think, here's our list of priorities, and then we go, oops, I think we might have to move the pump station down on Lagoon. So that's the nature of budgeting, is the need to adapt. And the fact that we're starting to build our resources, this gives us some flexibility as those unforeseen things pop up. Some of these other things are just monies that we've had for a while and are very specific in terms of whether it's deferred revenue for frontage, sidewalk funds. I can't comment a lot on that other than that they are earmarked for something specific. When they were paid by the developer, they were paid for something specific, and we can't just use it for whatever we like. Sometimes, for instance, they put in a development and we ask the developer to put a sidewalk in, but we may say, well, you know what, we're not ready for you to put a sidewalk in yet because we know we have to dig it up there to put in a new sewer line or something. So we defer having them put the sidewalk in. So instead of them doing it, we collect some money for that sidewalk. We keep it there until whatever the reason is stopping them from putting it in, we fix the sewer line, whatever, and then at our cost we put it in and we draw the money out of here. Okay. So this is sometimes what I jokingly refer to as the pots of money, but it's important that you as council know that this is where you have your monies available other than what's in what you know about that's in your bank account, but it's distributed into all of these different areas, monies that we collect. So that side trip was a bit of a lengthy one, but I think an important one. That was Note 5. So some of these are related. So Note 6, we have talked about this already, which was the need to defer into the future. And I'm hoping next year that instead of just giving you a 5-year capital plan, we give you a 10-year one, which is always tougher to do. But it's important to give you a bigger picture. So it's not just a 5-year window, but a 10-year. We've already talked about the deferred revenue, which I mentioned there. We did one minor change when we took the $2 million project and bumped it beyond the current budget window. At the request of the engineering department, we did swap that with a $400,000 transportation upgrade, moved that forward to 2019. So those are the only the major changes. There's 3 of them. We've talked about all 3, but I'm going to just remind you. On the big TCA sheet, nothing was changed except we added the sewer pump station move. We removed from the current budget period the $2 million transportation upgrade project, and we basically just moved. It was just a timing shift on this $400,000 project. And Note 7 again talks about that. So I just want to be really clear on these big numbers with council. So when we go back then and we look at your budget summary, at the end of those changes, which I've tried to walk you through as slowly and clearly as I can, given it's pretty complicated, we wind up with a small surplus. And in a number of cases, we have put additional monies into a capital reserve fund. So what we were hoping this evening, because I've been listening carefully to see if I hear any major changes, is that with council's approval, we would then get your approval in principle for this, and we can roll this up into a budget bylaw, which would come forward for your review. Anybody have any questions? Gord?
Just one question through you to the Director of Finance. When do we have the discussion about the business tax rate versus the residential tax rate?
Okay. So I'm glad you brought that up because we were working on that this afternoon. So basically, Ian and I had some discussions because what is unusual this year is I'm a little bit uncomfortable coming up with our total tax revenues because we don't have our final tax roll yet, okay? But when I put these various numbers into the spreadsheets and we take into account the reduction of the ONI appeal, which was a loss of $2 million on residential and $8 million on business. That is almost a 10% reduction on our business assessment database. And depending on how you do the calculation, and I don't want to bog you down on that, it's confusing. I think we're probably going to be short about 60,000 on what I projected here, but we still have within the next week the final tax roll, and I can bring that back as part of the final budget presentation. The good news when we did all this, last year your multiplier for business tax was 3.95. Now those multipliers actually shift depending on the shifts within your assessment base. So if your assessment base for residential is growing far quicker than your business assessment rate, which is what happened this year, like we actually saw quite a growth in the residential assessment, and we actually saw a decrease in the business rate. So that sort of shifts how much proportionate tax, and in some scenarios it actually increased the business multiplier. Now with the ONI reduction, when we had about a 10th check on these calculations, the multiplier has gone down from 3.95 this year to basically 3.7. It comes in at 3.69. So that is with a 3.5% tax increase we're able, and that's a 3.5% tax increase across the board for everyone. And I want to give you a couple figures, but I want to give you a cautionary note too. So when I say the average homeowner, their house this year, when we do all this, is $434,000. That's a bit of an increase over last year of $429,000. It's gone up about $5,000, your average house. A 3.5% increase, and this is just the municipal tax portion. So remember, on your bill, you've got all those other things you pay for. It's $56. Okay, so last year municipal portion was $1,593. This year it's $1,649. That's on your average house. And remember, if your house is not average, if it's way above, or the assessors noted that your neighbor's house is just sold for double, your assessed value is going to go up, and it's going to go up more than the average, right? So that's the tricky bit about averages. So I'm always really cautious when I mention these figures, because you want to be careful, because the tax notices come out, and the first thing we all do, me included, is go, well, those guys said it was only going up $56. Well, geez, it's gone up $200. Well, that's because you've got the regional district, you've got the hospital, you've got the school, you've got all those folks, and their increases may not be 3.5. They could be something quite different. So that's what we're looking at. I always like to sort of get to, this is the bottom line, which quite often is what you need to know. So I'll just pause for a minute.
Any further questions? So I guess I understand we're looking for a motion to approve the budget in principle and instruct the preparation of the bylaws, budget bylaws.
And I'll bring
correct?
it back in the form of a budget bylaw with a report with it. Mm-hmm.
Is anybody prepared to make that motion?
Okay, I actually thought we'd covered the sewer reports. Those are in there this evening to just, I can go through them if you like. It was just to make sure that you realize that I have included in there the new cost for moving the pump station.
All those or discussion? Jason?
Just wanted to point out that with the latest numbers Andrea gave us of the $434,000 for the average house in Colwood, we now have enough money in our housing, affordable housing reserves to buy a house, one house.
Any other comments or questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you very much.
So a motion to adjourn? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.